Before we start with the video, we want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Private Internet Access VPN. Every time you connect to the internet, even at home, your data can be intercepted by your ISP, advertisers, or anyone who's on the same network. I found that while researching videos at a cafe, I kept hitting geoblocks, and worse, I realized I was connected to public Wi-Fi with no protection. PIA VPN stops that. It creates an encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet, hides your IP address, and keeps your browsing truly private. Beyond security, PIA gives you freedom online. With servers in 91 countries in every US state, you can watch shows that normally aren't available where you live simply by changing your virtual location. Part of the reason I use PIA VPN regularly now is to watch movies like Zodiac that aren't available in Canada but are elsewhere. It works seamlessly with all major streaming platforms, Netflix, Disney+, Amazon Prime, and more. Using streaming services without that flexibility is like paying for a 3-course meal and being told you can only eat from the kids' menu. PIA works on all major platforms, Windows, macOS, Android, iOS, Linux, and many more. One subscription protects unlimited devices, and you can rest assured PIA doesn't store your data, as their no-logs policy has been verified in court, so your data stays yours. Right now, you can click on the link in the description or go to piavpn.com/unpredictable to get an 83% discount, plus 4 extra months free. That's just $2.03 a month, backed by a 30-day money-back guarantee. Click the link in the description to start protecting your digital life today.
What is your emergency? Ma'am? What? Who did? Hang on. Hang on, ma'am. I got medical emergency. 681 Eagle Drive. Ma'am, I'm trying to get an ambulance to you. Hang on a minute. What's going on, ma'am?
This is the call 911 operators responded to at 2:31 a.m. on June 6, 1996. A frantic mother, Darlie Routier, screams for help as she finds her sons, 6-year-old Devin and 5-year-old Damon, brutally stabbed in the living room of their North Texas home. Trying desperately to calm the screaming woman down and get information, the operator repeatedly asks Darlie to explain what is going on, but in her shock, all she can keep repeating is,
Oh my God!
Immediately, authorities are called to the scene. There, they are met with what they can only describe as a bloodbath, one of the most grotesque crime scenes they've ever witnessed. Paramedics move into the living room where the attack reportedly occurred. There, they find the reason for the call. 2 boys, 6-year-old Devin and 5-year-old Damon, stabbed repeatedly in the torso and legs, slowly bleeding to death. 6-year-old Devin is pronounced dead at the scene, leaving paramedics to shift their focus to 5-year-old Damon, who is somehow still clinging to life. Despite multiple attempts to perform CPR, it becomes clear that Damon's lungs have been punctured during the attack. He dies later that night. With both boys gone, authorities turn their attention to the only known witness to the attack, Darlie herself. Supposedly injured by the same intruder who killed her children, Darlie recounts the events of the night from her hospital bed. Little did the police know that in taking her statement, they were stepping into what would become one of the most extensive and controversial homicide investigations in Texas history, an investigation whose outcome would be scrutinized and debated for decades to come.
Rowlett police will continue a 24-hour watch at the crime scene, and investigators will return early Friday morning, looking for any clues that may help them solve this brutal double murder. In Rowlett, Jay Gray, Texas News 5.
For many, Darlie's whole life story would be whittled down to those few hours on the morning of June 6, 1996. But there lived a young woman before the tragedy, and this woman's life and character would profoundly impact how the public would treat her in the years to come. In the 26 years Darlie lived before her life changed completely, she was seen as the quintessential Southern belle. Well-liked, sweet and bubbly, she met her husband Darren at a Western Sizzlin', the restaurant her mother worked at. She was 15, he was 17, and they immediately fell in love, getting married at Darren's parents' house 4 years later. From there, life only seemed to improve for the young couple. Darren launched his own electronics business, which quickly became successful, allowing him to bring home a decent income, which would only grow in following years. In 1995, his company's gross revenue was $500,000, making his own take-home salary $125,000. To put it into perspective, that's around $260,000 today. The money was coming in quickly, but it seemed that the Routiers were spending it even faster. As a young couple in their 20s in the top 2% tax bracket of their age, they indulged in whatever their hearts desired, whether it was Darren's 1982 Jaguar to drive to work, or an $800 tombstone for Darlie's dearly departed cat. Even the boys were joyful, as the neighborhood kids from all around would call their house the Nintendo House for the elaborate game room and use it as a local hangout spot. Now you might think the Routiers were simply materialistic or showy, but they were also known to be quite generous and kind. Neighbors frequently stated that Darlie would send food and home-cooked meals to sick or mourning families on their street, even once recalling a time when Darlie made a mortgage payment for a neighbor who was undergoing treatment for cancer. Parents on the street sent their kids to the Routier house for playdates all the time, and knew that their children would be well taken care of with Darlie and her family. It was a time of abundance for the Routiers. They were well-liked, financially comfortable, and surrounded by a sense of stability. But they had no idea that the life they had worked so hard to build was about to come crashing down. By early 1996, the Routiers were at least 1 month behind on their mortgage payment. They owed $10,000 in back taxes and $22,000 on credit cards. To make matters worse, after the birth of her third son Drake, Darlie was starting to experience the symptoms of postpartum depression. For many women, the symptoms of postpartum depression are alleviated within months after birth. But for others, these symptoms stick around for much longer and are often left unaddressed, as the stigma surrounding depression in new mothers dissuades many from reaching out for help. In Darlie's case, the symptoms were reaching a boiling point, and on May 3, 1996, around a month before the murders, she wrote this in her diary. "Devin, Damon, and Drake, I hope you will forgive me for what I am about to do. My life has been such a hard fight for a long time, and I just can't find the strength to keep fighting anymore. I love you three more than anything else in this world, and I want all three of you to be healthy and happy, and I don't want you to see a miserable person every time you look at me." This excerpt from her diary has been scrutinized from every angle, by Darlie's defense and prosecution alike. Regardless of the many opinions on this note, as time passed and after a heartfelt discussion with her husband, Darlie reported feeling better, with many stating that she went back to her usual bright and chipper self. But that didn't mean that her problems had been solved. The couple's finances were still a significant concern, and the two were still having hard conversations regarding their financial state, even up until the night before the incident. Now, the events of the night before June 6, 1996 have been heavily debated both in court and beyond, and while no one can say for sure what exactly happened that night, what follows is a recounting of the events as remembered by Darlie. To set the scene, Darren had left the house to drop Darlie's sister off at home. While he was gone, the oldest boys, Damon and Devin, brought their blankets to the living room to watch TV with Darlie. When Darren came home, he joined Darlie on the couch to talk, before returning upstairs to go to sleep, while Darlie fell asleep downstairs with Damon and Devin in front of the TV. From here, I will read out Darlie Routier's testimony of the night her children were murdered in her own words. "I wake up and feel a pressure on me. I felt Damon press on my right shoulder and heard him cry. This made me really come awake and realize that there was a man standing down at my feet walking away from me. I walked after him and heard glass breaking. I got halfway through the kitchen and turned back around to run and turn on the light. I ran back towards the utility room and realized there was a big white-handled knife lying on the floor. It was then that I realized I had blood all over me, and I grabbed the knife, thinking that he was in the garage, so I thought he might still be there, and I yelled for Darren. I ran back through the kitchen and realized the entire living area had blood all over everything. I put the knife on the counter and ran into the entrance, turned on a light, and started screaming for Darren. I think I screamed twice, and he ran out of the bedroom with his jeans on and no glasses, and was yelling, 'What is it? What is it?' I remember seeing he cut them. He tried to kill me, my neck. He ran down the stairs and into the room where the boys were. I grabbed the phone and called 911. Darren started giving Devin CPR while I put a towel on my neck and a towel over Damon's back. I remember telling Damon to hang on, Mommy was there. I looked over at Darren and saw the glass table had been knocked halfway off and the flower arrangement had been knocked over. I then stood up and turned around and saw glass all over the kitchen floor. I tried to glance over to see if anything was out of place or if anything was missing. I was still on the phone with 911 and I don't recall what at all was being said because everything was happening so fast. I went back to Damon and by then he had stopped moving and the police walked through the door. The paramedics came and tried to work on the children. Darren was screaming, "Who did this? Who did this?" and I started asking if my babies were dead. Darren was crying and said yes. After that, I just remember screaming and showing Darren my neck. Darren took me out to the front of the house and by then, Darren ran upstairs to make sure the baby was okay and then handed him to Karen, our neighbor. I remember them holding a towel on my neck and wrapping my arm and then they put me in an ambulance. I remember we got to the hospital and then them telling me they were taking me to surgery. They took off my necklace and put me to sleep. This was the statement of events provided to police by Darlie Routier. After the attack, Darlie was rushed to hospital to address her wounds. Upon arrival, doctors agreed that due to the nature of her neck wound, the safest course of action was to rush her to the operating room to perform exploratory surgery on her injuries. Dr. Alejandro Santos, the lead doctor who would perform this surgery, noted her wounds as a 9-centimeter laceration in zone 2 of the neck, which had come 2 millimeters from her carotid artery, a laceration on the right arm, which required stitches, and a laceration on her left shoulder. Upon cleaning and tending to the wounds, the exploratory surgery was complete, where Dr. Santos determined the wounds to be superficial. It is important here to note that the use of the term superficial, as stated in his testimony, is medically defined as a wound that did not go past the platysma in the neck, which is the muscle below the skin and the fat. It is for this reason, he explained in his testimony, that he used the term superficial to describe the wounds. While Darlie was recovering in the hospital, the police were now faced with one of the most violent and complex homicide investigations their department had ever seen. It wouldn't take long for lead investigator Jimmy Patterson to call in for support, which came in the form of James Cron, a retired crime scene analyst whose take on the case would define the investigation. The scene itself was described to be a bloodbath, marred with overturned tables, pools of blood throughout the home, and the body of Devon still laying in the living room carpet. The investigators' first move was finding the killer's likely point of entry, which was determined to have been through a window on the ground floor of the house, whose screen seemed to have been cut with a knife. Although, upon further inspection, investigators were confused when they found that the window still had a thick layer of dust sitting on the windowsill, still entirely undisturbed. Furthermore, the mulch outside the window was also completely undisturbed, with no footprints in sight. Noting these discrepancies, investigators now turned their attention to the rest of the evidence found in the home, most importantly, the murder weapon. The knife that had been used in the attack was taken from the kitchen of the Routiers' own home, and was found on the counter by the sink, dripping with blood. It was placed there by Darlie herself, as she stated in the 911 call. When she found the knife, she had picked it up, getting her prints on the weapon.
Okay, it's alright, it's okay. We got the prints, baby.
Now originally, the police's first assumption was that this was a robbery gone wrong, but were quickly confounded when they found that beside the knife was Darlie's jewelry, rings, and bracelets, left untouched on the counter. With the robbery motive crossed out, the authorities followed the blood through the house. In the kitchen, there was a pool of blood on the floor, blood splatters on the counters near the sink and the cupboards below, but the sink itself seemed to be completely clean. The two forensic analysts who examined the scene later said that the sink looked like it had been cleaned of blood. Sure enough, after testing, both the sink and the faucet tested positive for traces of blood. This means that there was blood in the sink at some point, but it had been conveniently cleaned away before the police arrived. This was not the only place lacking blood. As investigators moved throughout the home following the trail of blood the supposed intruder left, the trail stopped inside the house. Even after testing suspicious stains found outside, no traces of blood were detected. In fact, there was nothing beyond the home that indicated that an intruder had been there at all. The discrepancies did not stop here, as police turned to the area where the crime took place. In the living room, they noticed something wrong. The vase atop the coffee table had been thrown to its side, although strangely, neither the glass atop the coffee table nor the vase were broken. A wine rack had been pushed, forcing a wine glass to shatter onto the ground. But as investigators later noted, the pieces were laying on top of the trail of Darlie's blood, suggesting that it had broken after Darlie bled through the kitchen. The same could be said of a vacuum that had supposedly been knocked over during the struggle. yet investigators found bloody footprints and splatters underneath it, along with a clear track in the blood indicating that it was rolled to its spot. To lead investigator Jimmy Patterson and James Cron, each of these discrepancies could only mean one thing. The crime scene was staged, and the killer must have come from within the home. This was an inside job. Once this determination was made, police worked quickly to put together their case and collect their evidence in what they described as the most intensive and exhaustive investigation ever conducted by the Rowlett Police Department. Finally, on June 18, 1996, the Rowlett PD moved in.
John and Chip evidence at the crime scene told one story. Darlie Routier's account of that deadly night was a far cry different. Police say it was a vicious, planned attack in which the mother allegedly stabbed her children to death and spun a tale to cover it up.
We believe that the white male suspect, described by Darlie Routier as the man that attacked her and murdered her children, never existed.
Darlie is innocent. I feel that she has not done this. She would barely spank her children, let alone do this to them.
Only 12 days after the deaths of her children, Darlie Routier was arrested on 2 counts of capital murder. News of her arrest sent shockwaves throughout the town and far beyond. A community that had once mourned with her now stood stunned, struggling to reconcile the image of a grieving mother with that of an accused killer.
You know, if I was defending myself with an intruder, I would die defending my kids and not have a few scratches.
Nope, never believed her. Never. Because if that was my child, I would kill for my child and I would die for my child. I don't think anybody intentionally went into that house and killed those 2 boys.
Neighbors who knew Darlie, whose kids played at her house, posted signs in their front yard professing her innocence. Her family and friends rallied around her, certain that the woman they knew could have never done what the police claimed she had.
We will be very supportive of her. We're still going to love her as much as we do today. And I would trust my children in her care, even if they, like I said, even if they say that they convinced her to say she was guilty. She would never hurt my children. Never.
Although, not everyone held this belief, and as word spread about the 26-year-old Texas mother arrested for brutally murdering her own children, the media dug their claws into the case. The story burned like wildfire, and with it, Darlie's reputation. Absolutely everything about her was called into question. Her hair, her nails, her body, the way she talked, the way she cried, all of it was fair game to broadcast to the masses. The character assassination had become so extreme that many were now calling her the Texas Susan Smith, comparing her, without solid evidence, to the South Carolina mother who drowned both of her children by strapping them into their car seats and driving her car into the lake. Susan Smith had originally claimed that a black man had kidnapped her children in a carjacking, only for this to have later been exposed as a lie to cover up her own crime. The outrage from this case heavily colored the public's response to Darlie's arrest, indicting her as a killer long before her trial had even taken place.
It's time to stop. She is not a Susan Smith, and we're going to prove this.
But it wasn't just the way that she looked that fed the media fire. At the core of the public's deep disdain of Darlie was a short video taken at Damon and Devon's gravesite only a few days after the murder, on the day of Devon's birthday.
For some, this may seem a strange thing to do in an odd place and time.
Happy birthday, dear Devin.
Singing Happy Birthday in a cemetery to a son who was brutally stabbed to death just over a week ago.
Love you, Devin and Damon.
But Darlie and Darren Routier say this is appropriate for them and their family. Helium balloons instead of headstones to remember Devin, who would have turned 7 today.
In this short video, which was plastered on the screen of every news outlet in Texas, showed Darlie and her sister spraying silly string on the boy's gravestone while singing Happy Birthday. In it, Darlie seems far from the grieving mother she was expected to be, smiling and chewing gum, and when reporters asked her about why she chose to celebrate them this way, she said,
Even though we're sad because Devin and Devin aren't here, we try to hang on to what we can to get us through these times.
This was all the public needed to brand her a killer. Their minds were made, and now all that was left was proving it in court. Thus began one of the most closely watched trials in Texas, the State versus Darlie Routier. Following the arrest, the town of Rowlett was flush with news cameras. The case of the killer mom was a hit story across Texas, with thousands tuning in to find out more. As the public eagerly dissected Darlie's life and past, consuming every detail from her fancy home to high-maintenance upkeep, many of those following the case had already made up their mind. The town of Rowlett in the county of Dallas could no longer balance the weight of the public scrutiny while still holding a fair trial with an impartial jury. This is why, in September of 1996, Darlie's court-appointed lawyers asked for her trial to be moved out of Dallas County to nearby Kerr County because of pretrial publicity. However, this motion has come under significant scrutiny, as some suggest that the decision to hold the trial in a smaller, more conservative town like Kerrville, which had one of the highest conviction rates at the time, made it more likely for the jury to favor the prosecution. It was decisions like these that led the Routiers to dump the court-appointed attorney and mortgage the house to afford big-shot lawyer Doug Mulder, known as a force to be reckoned with in Texas courtrooms. To supplement his work, Darren also hired a private investigator, ex-FBI agent Lloyd Harrell, to investigate what he believed the police had overlooked. With a star-studded and very expensive team, the Routiers were hopeful that when they walked Darlie through the courthouse doors for opening statements, she would walk back out as a free woman. Unfortunately, this couldn't be further from the truth. As the jury filed in on January 6, 1997, the court sat down to listen to both sides' opening statements. As per usual, the prosecution gave their statement first, presenting Darlie as a self-centered woman, a materialistic woman, and a woman cold enough, in fact, to murder her own 2 children, while the defense quickly followed with their own plea to the jury to see Darlie as an American mother, just like any other number of American mothers. Lawyer Doug Mulder continued to say, "She's not perfect, never said she was, nobody is ever going to say she was, but the description of becoming a psychotic killer will not be borne out in the evidence. And when you have heard all of that, although you won't know what happened fully at 5801 Eagle, you will know that the evidence does not prove that Darlie Routier committed this crime." Now, the entire trial spanned multiple weeks, with the verdict being delivered almost a month later, in February. In this time, dozens of experts, officers, friends, and family gave their testimonies to either defend Darlie or prove her a killer. And with hundreds of pages of documents, court transcripts, and exhibits, it is impossible for us to cover every single piece of evidence investigated since then. But the main arguments presented by each side have been condensed for you here. Let's start at the beginning, with how the killer got into the home. According to police, the only evidence of forced entry was found in a window located in the utility room of the home, found with a sliced screen, creating a hole large enough for a person to pass through. However, the prosecution had a different idea and argued that Darlie had cut the screen herself to stage a break-in. They argued that had an intruder really entered the home through this window, there would have been evidence of disturbances in the surrounding area. But upon investigation, authorities found a layer of undisturbed dust still sitting on the windowsill. Not only that, but a plot of mulch positioned at the right of the window also sat completely undisturbed. Running through that mulch would have been the killer's quickest route of escape after leaving the scene, unless they deliberately went 12 feet out of their way to avoid it. Would the killer have really spent precious seconds avoiding a plot of mulch when he was escaping the scene of the crime? Crime scene expert James Cron didn't think so, and made that clear in his testimony in court. Not only this, but investigators also questioned why an intruder would cut the screen to begin with, when removing it was the simplest option. But it wasn't just the window and the area surrounding it. Upon investigation through the home, experts found a microscopic fiber clinging to one of the knives in the kitchen's knife block. The fiber was made of fiberglass rods and rubber, almost identical to the makeup of the window screen. This meant, to the investigators at least, that the knife that was used to cut the window screen came from inside the Routiers' own kitchen. In their view, this pointed to a staged break-in, one carried out not by an intruder, but by Darlie herself. Now, the evidence surrounding the window seemed pretty damning when described by the prosecution, but the defense had a different take. According to some, the undisturbed dust on the windowsill was easily explained by the fact that the window was close enough to the ground that an intruder could have passed through easily without having to touch the windowsill at all. The defense even had an explanation for the most damning piece of evidence, the fiber on the knife. Fibers by nature are extremely small and light, easily transferred from one item to another. Considering only one intact fiber was found on the knife, the defense attributed its discovery to the investigation's order of events. When dusting for fingerprints, the investigators dusted the window first, and then moved on to the knife block, making it entirely possible that upon dusting the window for fingerprints, a fiber could have clung to the brush and been transferred to the knife block when it was dusted later on. Although this wasn't enough to absolve Darlie from suspicion, it was enough for many to cast doubt on the prosecution's evidence. Although it was not just physical evidence that the prosecution relied on to convince the jury of Darlie's guilt. Throughout the trial, lawyer for the prosecution Greg Davis relied heavily on Darlie's alleged lack of emotion to prove that she was a person capable of killing her own children. This argument was not a difficult one to make, as the media and news cameras had already captured Darlie's every move since her release from the hospital and broadcasted it nationwide, allowing anyone to become an armchair expert on her behavior. The allegations of inappropriate grieving began the night her children were murdered, beginning from the moment she made the 911 call. Some called her uncooperative when the operator was trying to get information with her. Others also pointed out that she mentioned on the phone that when she picked up the knife, she got her fingerprints on it, saying, The prosecution were quick to point to this as evidence of guilt, saying that rather than being concerned with the state of her dying children, she was instead concerned about fingerprint evidence. But the emotionless allegations do not stop here. Even the first officer on the scene, Officer Waddell, stated that when he arrived, he found Darlie simply standing there, and did not comply when he told her multiple times to put pressure on Damon's wounds. When asked whether he believed that Darlie was in a state in which she could lend assistance to her children, Officer Waddell said yes, stating, "Well, she appeared to know everything that was going on inside the house. She was real alert and able to tell me what had happened. I thought if she was worried about fingerprints on a knife, she could certainly take care of her kids." Even as paramedics were carrying Damon's body out of the home, he noticed that Darlie never once asked if Damon was okay or where they were taking him. At the hospital, nurses testified that Darlie was speaking with a flat affect and withdrawn, not overtly emotional. But for the prosecution and the jury, the nail in the coffin came down to the item that defined the case, the silly string video. The video had made the rounds from news channel to news channel, showing the elaborate setup from the balloons to the banner, and a smiling, gum-chewing Darlie spraying silly string on the Boyds' headstones. Some likened it to dancing on their graves. Although, however visceral the people's reaction was to the video, and the image the prosecution presented of Darlie, the defense was quick to remind the jury that the descriptions given here were of a woman who had just seen her children murdered. A woman who was likely traumatized and in shock. Who are we to pass judgment on how we think she should have grieved? Not only this, but the defense also brought in multiple witnesses who interacted with Darlie after her children's deaths, who stated that she was very clearly grieving when they interacted with her. Karen White, Darlie's neighbor, David Rogers, her pastor, Dana Godfrey, her friend, Cara Byford, and the list goes on, all claiming that they watched Darlie grieve appropriately. Although, many refute these testimonies by pointing out that they all came from people who were already friends of Darlie's, and therefore were unlikely to testify against her. Although the defense did not only bring testimonies from Darlie's friends, but also called into question the notes taken by the nurses at the hospital, where there are multiple instances in which they document that Darlie was crying, visibly upset, and very emotional, contradicting their original testimonies describing her flat affect. As for their most damning piece of evidence, the silly string tape, Darlie's defense attorney has often been criticized for not presenting a secret police recording of a somber memorial service held at the gravesite earlier that day. When questioned about the recording in court, the police officers pled the fifth to avoid self-incrimination, a decision that many consider shocking to this day. Now, along with the physical evidence in the home and the analysis of her emotional state, the prosecution were now ready to call into question the evidence of guilt found on Darlie herself, her wounds. With both boys having been stabbed so violently and deeply that the knife went all the way through the body, why was it that Darlie's wounds were considered superficial? Why wouldn't the killer exert the same amount of force towards killing Darlie herself? According to the prosecution, this is because there was no killer at all. The story the state presents is that Darlie, after stabbing and killing both of her boys, then turns the knife on herself, not to kill, but to maim just enough to make the police believe that she was a victim as well. Their evidence is as follows. The first main point made by the prosecution was the severity of Darlie's cuts. The surgeon treating Darlie upon her arrival at the hospital described Darlie's injuries as superficial and inconsistent with other defensive wounds he had seen in his career. Apart from her visible injuries, Darlie was also found to have severe and extensive bruising on both of her arms, but these bruises were not documented during her hospital visit because, according to the nurses, they were never there. Multiple nurses who treated Darlie the morning of July 6 stated during their testimonies that the bruises that were photographed on Darlie's arms were not present during her initial visit to the hospital, and Darlie showed no signs of pain or discomfort in those areas. The bruises only appeared after she left the hospital, leading many to claim that Darlie inflicted these bruises on herself after she came home from the hospital to further her story of being attacked. But it wasn't just the nature of the injuries, but where they took place that was also reason for suspicion. Darlie, in all of her testimonies, was never clear exactly where and when her injuries took place.
No, I didn't sleep through that. I mean, how would anybody sleep through something like that?
But yet you say you don't remember.
But I don't remember. Can you imagine waking up out of your sleep with a man attacking you?
Well, what do you think happened then if you can't remember but you don't think you slept through it?
I think that I tried to fight with a man, and I think that he either knocked me unconscious, or I think that when, he slit my throat or whatever, I think I passed out.
The prosecution uses this lack of certainty to provide their own theory, which was that after the murder, Darlie used the knife to cut her own neck and arm over the kitchen sink to self-inflict her own injuries. Evidence for this theory included the blood splatters found on the counter by the sink, the blood in front of the sink, and the suspiciously cleaned up blood in the sink itself. Along with this, according to experts, the blood splatters found on the kitchen floor were indicative of someone standing still, rather than someone in movement, say chasing after a killer, as Darlie claimed to be. Dr. Vincent DeMaio, chief medical examiner for Bexar County, who testified for the defense during the trial, and stated that not only were Darlie's injuries consistent with self-defense, but also were very unlikely to have been self-inflicted. According to him, the neck wound specifically was concerning, as not only did it come dangerously close to her carotid artery, which is an unlikely risk for someone to take when self-inflicting wounds, but both major wounds, the one on her arm and shoulder, were both found on the right side of her body. Darlie is right-handed, meaning that both of these wounds had to have been made by her non-dominant left hand. She still could have inflicted the injuries with her right hand, but the angle would have been very imprecise and uncomfortable, and it is extremely unlikely that she would take that risk. In terms of the bruising, the defense called up a number of witnesses, including Cara Byford, a friend of Darlie's who claims that she distinctly remembered seeing the bruising on Darlie's arms when she visited her in the hospital. The defense's medical expert, Dr. Vincent DeMaio, also stated that upon examination of the photos of her bruising and its coloration, the bruises present on Darlie's arms could definitely have been inflicted on the night of June 6 during the attack, and are consistent with defensive wounds received during a struggle. One of the first concerns that police had, and the origin of their suspicion towards Darlie, was the many inconsistencies they found in her story. There were many instances in which Darlie changed her story, contradicted herself, and changed key points of the events of the night. Firstly, throughout the many testimonies and interrogations Darlie underwent, her account of events, including her description of the killer, are constantly changing. In her initial statement, she claimed she saw the intruder walking away and chased him out. In later versions, she said she awoke to him on top of her and fought him off on the sofa. She never clarified where the struggle occurred, casting doubt on whether it happened at all. These inconsistencies led prosecutors to question what they had called her selective amnesia. Furthermore, the night of the murder, Darlie said she slept in the living room because baby Drake's movements would usually wake her up. If this is true, many question how she could then sleep through the brutal stabbings of two of her children undisturbed. The inconsistencies did not stop here, as one of the main ones was the issue of the damage found at the scene. Upon entry, police noted an overturned glass-top coffee table with the glass top unbroken. There was also a vase toppled over and a lamp askew, but neither item was severely damaged. During the struggle, a wine rack was apparently pushed, breaking a glass, and a vacuum cleaner was tipped. However, blood was found beneath both items, not on top. If Darlie had been bleeding and chasing the attacker as she claimed, there should have been blood on top as well. Investigators also noted blood streaks suggesting the vacuum was rolled into place, leading to the claim that these items were staged after the fact and not during the attack. The prosecution used all of this evidence to posit the theory that Darlie, after killing her children, staged the crime scene before calling 911 to pin the murder on a mystery intruder, one she couldn't even describe to police. This was a bold and difficult claim to rebuke, but the defense had a plan. With their own expert, a former FBI investigator, they investigated the claims of staging and stated that Darlie's testimony was not indicative of someone who staged the crime scene. He referred to the way that she described the events of the night and the fact that she did not bring up the damaged items until asked about it by the police. He explained that people who stage crime scenes usually mention the staged items right away to make sure their efforts aren't overlooked. As for the changes in the story, the defense called a forensic psychologist who examined Darlie for hours after the murders and testified that Darlie was likely experiencing traumatic amnesia, which causes a person who has undergone a traumatic event to forget certain parts of their memory of the event, explaining her changing story. Aside from this, the defense also called into question the reliability of the police's notes, specifically whether they even took notes at all. Upon cross-examination, attorney Doug Mulder questioned various officers who were on the scene the night of the murder, and found that very few of them were taking notes on their findings. But the most significant and detrimental piece of evidence that supported the argument of the defense was the presence of a single sock, found 75 yards down the road from the Routier home. On the sock, investigators found the blood of both Damon and Devin Routier. This finding cast a huge wrench in the prosecution's arguments, because it calls into question the timeline. According to the state, after killing her children, Darlie inflicted her own superficial injuries, staged the scene, and then called 911 and stayed on the line until police and first responders arrived. But with the added evidence of the sock, the entire timeline falls apart. According to experts, after being stabbed, Damon could have only survived at most 9 minutes with his injuries before he died. If we start from the moment Damon was stabbed and we end with his death at most 9 minutes later, 6 of those minutes can be accounted for with a 911 call. And paramedics arrived within a minute after the call ended and found Damon still alive. Taking all of this into account, Darlie would have only had at most 2 minutes to get both boys' blood on the sock, run 75 yards down the street, drop the sock, run 75 yards back to the house, injure herself, stage the crime scene, and clean the sink before calling 911. For reference, 75 yards is 3/4 the length of a football field. This would have been almost impossible. For many, the singular sock became the piece of evidence that held up Darlie's innocence, and there was little the prosecutors could do to dispel the issue of the timeline. But one of the main questions that still remained in the minds of many was the issue of a motive. Darlie was well liked in her community, known as a kind, caring mother and a supportive neighbor. How could someone like this be capable of killing her own children? The prosecution's answer to this question came down to what many would consider character assassination. To counter the image of the quintessential American mother, the state instead painted a different picture, one of a selfish, narcissistic woman who cared only for herself and her image.
Several times this morning, prosecutor Greg Davis approached Routier, pointed at her, and said she killed her sons. The last time he did, she responded by calling him a liar.
Leaning into the media's coverage of the family's living, many posited the theory that their financial troubles, expensive lifestyle, and Darlie's postpartum depression all came together to push her to kill her children for the life insurance money they would gain in their deaths.
Children are costly. Children demand attention. Children demand money. And if you eliminate those children, you eliminate those needs and those demands of the children.
Although, many people were quick to see the faults in this theory, pointing first to the fact that if Darlie wanted to kill the source of her stress, why only kill the 2 older boys and not the infant that required the most amount of attention? Not only this, but the life insurance for each boy would have only paid out to $5,000 per child, meaning the payout for this brutal murder would not even have been enough to cover the boys' funeral expenses. If she was really in it for the money, why not kill Darren, whose life insurance policy payout was $800,000, more than enough for all 4 of them to live comfortably? Regardless of the holes in the motive argument, the prosecution does not need a motive to convict, only evidence that proves beyond reasonable doubt that Darlie committed the crimes. And for the jury, they had heard enough.
We're very optimistic. We think that after the arguments, the jury considers all the evidence that they'll do the right thing.
I feel great about the case. I think we did exactly what we set out to do, and that is we've proved beyond any reasonable doubt this woman is guilty of killing her 2 children.
Routier's family has been seen with their heads bowed around the courthouse, but they say it's not because of defeat.
We're praying.
That's not a look of beating.
Yeah.
When people put their heads down doesn't mean they're beaten.
No, we're not beaten until this is over.
I started telling Darlie yesterday and today that she should prepare herself for a death sentence because I thought the handwriting was on the wall and that she should be prepared for it.
After a month of testimonies from medical experts, friends, family, and investigators, on February 1st, 1997, the jury passed down a guilty verdict. Darlie Routier would be sentenced to death by lethal injection.
You fight. That's what you do. Just fight. Just fight. Just keep on and on and on until you're dead.
Will you ever quit?
No.
What's your goal? You'll never quit.
I'll never quit.
Why?
For the truth.
Justice has not been served.
You think we're just going to quit and lay down, John? On this I mean, how do you feel about it?
Rick Davis is a killer. He's going to burn.
What's your reaction? Just repeat that.
They're lying. They're all lying. Rick Davis is a killer.
What would you do? I don't know of anything I'd do differently. It's just...
Devastated, Darlie's family did what they could to attempt to appeal the decision. Hoping for a retrial, the defense argued that the transcripts compiled by stenographer Sandra Halsey were inaccurate, but the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals rejected their objection and upheld the conviction. Although, in the years following, Darlie's defense attorneys have filed for a request for new DNA testing, but the testing has yet to be completed. With years' worth of new evidence and changes in the way that the case is presented, some have even changed their initial opinions. Most notably, a jury member serving in the trial has now stated that they regret their decision to pass down a guilty verdict, and would not support this decision given the information that they have now. Author of Precious Angels, a book detailing Darlie's murder and heavily supporting Darlie's guilty verdict, has now come out stating that she's changed her mind, and no longer believes that she received a fair trial, and that she may not be guilty at all. In the years following the highly publicized trial and sentencing, Darlie's case has become infamous, with entire books and archives dedicated to proving either her innocence or her guilt. The case became a moral battleground, and with the amount of information surrounding it, it's almost impossible to be sure of the truth. Even in this video, there was still much we were not able to cover. Countless pieces of evidence, from the bloodstain pattern analysis to Darren's attempted insurance fraud plan to the mysterious black car seen on Darlie Street the night of the murders, all of these could not be covered because ultimately, in the end, they did not change the outcome of the case.
It wasn't a big shock.
Guilty.
Is it? Oh my.
Bizarre. I don't understand it.
Comes into a neighborhood like this and just breaks in and murders two boys and didn't take anything, and that's really hard to believe.
I believe Darlie's innocent. I don't care what the verdict is, and we're going to fight it. We're going to stand next to her family all the way.
Darlie was convicted of capital murder, and to this day sits on death row at the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, Texas. Whether she deserves it or not is up to you.